Just under 2 weeks ago, I released my very first album as an independent artist. But I didn't start with an album. I have released and re-released all of the songs on this record multiple times leading up to this. To do this, I utilized what's referred to as the Waterfall release system, wherein I released a song, then released 2 songs and 3 songs, repeating releases over time. So in this video, we're going to walk through exactly how I structured all of these releases. We're going to look at the data on Spotify and talk about how things played out for me. And I'm going to walk you through some key takeaways of some stuff that I have learned through this process that hopefully you can use if you decide to waterfall release your own music in the future. To start, I released 8 songs of my 10-song album as individual singles on Spotify. After that, I released 2 EPs on Spotify, sort of as the A-side and B-side of my record. And then finally, I released my full-length album, first one as an independent artist. Now, taking a step back to the EPs, technically speaking, the Waterfall releasing began with my EP rollout. I have my Dark EP on the top right. I released 3 EPs leading up to that, and the same with Light on the bottom. So if you're doing the math out there, all told, I actually have 16 releases for these songs, 17 including this album that just came out. Now, before we move forward, to give you some context about this strategy, this is the track listing for my album. I have 10 songs on the record, technically speaking, 8 full songs with an intro and an outro on either end. So if we look at the first Waterfall strategy that ultimately ended with my EP Dark, I started from the top of my record and just released the first 5 songs in a Waterfall strategy. Now for the second EP, I waterfall released these songs as well, but I did it in reverse. So for the first EP, Light Hero, I have Hero and then Daybreak, with Daybreak being the outro of the full-length album and of this 5-song EP. So now that the album is out, this is the complete overview of how this release strategy has played out. On the left side, you can see all of the singles I released, all 8 of them. On the top is my Dark EP strategy. On the bottom is my Light EP strategy. And on the far top right is the album itself with all 10 tracks. If you're doing the math here, you can see that To the Wolves has technically been released 6 times. Same with Hero, it has been released 6 times. But if you jump over to Dark, you can see that We Can Run has been released 3 times. Same with Darkness on the Light EP, it has only been released 3 times. And then in the middle, the other songs have been released sort of a varying range in between. Now, the main benefit of using the Waterfall strategy, and the reason I wanted to try this on my own, is because theoretically it stacks all of your data on Spotify. So as long as you use the same ISRC code, every time you release a song, no matter what release it is on, it will map to that exact same root file in Spotify's database and report all of the streams and data down to that root file. So Hero has the exact same ISRC code for all 6 releases that it has appeared on. They all map to the exact same file. Now, before I tested the Waterfall release strategy for myself, my understanding was that all of the data for a song would report all the way down to this root ISRC code. Not just streams, but also playlist ads, saves, and everything else that Spotify keeps track of for your music. And I was technically right about streams. All of the streams for Hero show exactly the same on every one of these releases. So to that end, the Waterfall strategy technically does stack data from release to release. However, I was wrong about saves and playlist ads. Technically speaking, because every single one of these releases is its own album and they all have their own individual album title, they also get their own unique identifier for Spotify, which they refer to as a track or album URI. So not only does every album have its own unique URI, every single track on that album has its own unique URI. And because they're completely different, that means every single album and every single track release of Hero has its own unique popularity score. And a track's popularity score is how Spotify determines whether or not the song is eligible for algorithmic playlists and editorial playlists on the platform. So things like radio, Release Radar, Discover Weekly, and all the way up to actual editorial playlists on the platform, all of that is determined by a song's popularity score. So before doing the Waterfall method, I thought if my original song, Hero, has a popularity score of 30, the next release will have that popularity score as well. But I was wrong about that. Every time I dropped a new Waterfall single or EP in this process, none of the data seemed to carry over to the new singles and the new EP. None of the cover art changed out, the popularity scores wouldn't update. The only thing that has continued to carry my catalog has been the original releases, not the EP stuff in the middle. And so before I released a full-length album, I kind of had it in my head that this is how it was going to play out once again for me. But a couple of surprises did happen. First of all of my cover art mapped to the album once it was out, which was cool with me because I like the cohesive look anyway, as evidenced by all of my cover. However, I also noticed that all of the popularity scores for my top songs had tanked. So all of my songs like Hero and Lions, tracks that had been sort of carrying my catalog, all got reset to 0. And in my mind, that meant all of the algorithmic opportunity was gone. These are songs that had already been out, so they weren't going to be on release radar day 1 because I couldn't pitch them. And now we're back at 0, so I can't get on Discover Weekly as easily. As a result of this, over the first week or so of my album being released, my listeners gradually decreased, my daily streams gradually decreased, and I ended up sort of flatlining around 11,000 average monthly listeners, whereas before I dropped the record, I was at like 16,000 or something like that. But fortunately, the Monday 10 days after the release of my album, I got a big Discover Weekly spike. Once I got this Discover Weekly boost, I went back and checked the popularity scores for the album again and saw that they had begun to climb. This has me thinking that maybe the data doesn't stack for re-releases of singles and EPs. However, when you release a full-length album, the data actually does compound. Okay, so now that I've done this process for myself, what did we learn? Well, the first thing is singles are the way to go. For me, I'm going to keep releasing singles. Those seem to do more for your catalog at large, growth on Spotify. That being said, if I do release a Waterfall strategy or Waterfall release an EP in the future, I will make sure to always have a new song to push inside of that release. That way I can pitch it to Spotify, get on release radar for my followers. The next thing I learned is I'm definitely going to keep releasing albums. Now, I'm still really fresh into my album cycle for my first album that I've ever released, but all signs point to this being actually a pretty positive event for me as an artist. And then the last thing I learned is that the more songs I have that are successful before I release an album, the better. I was fortunate before I released this record to have both Hero and Lions as songs that have continued to lift my catalog, which has helped fuel the impact of the record when it first came out. If I only had songs that were sort of like sitting at 10 popularity score, 15 popularity score and below, the album definitely would not have done as well. I'm getting a good Discover Weekly push this week as a result of the single versions of my songs, not necessarily the album versions of my songs. I believe those single versions are lifting the album versions, which then hopefully we'll see will trigger release radar in return, and then trigger Discover Weekly again in return after that. All that to say, the more successful songs I have leading into an album, the better I think that album will ultimately do, which obviously makes sense. So I hope this video has taught you a little something about Waterfall releasing your own music. Now, if I just did a complete flyby on you and you still have no idea how the Waterfall release strategy works, fortunately for you, I have a video on that very topic that I released about a year ago explaining the nuts and bolts of how this plays out before I even tested it for myself. If you want to watch that, you can check that video out right here. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.